Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our last week, I think, of the salient qualities of Paramhansa Yogananda from this biography by Swami Kriyananda. So let's start with a prayer, and then we'll go into our discussion for the day. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence and to act according to the inspiration of your guidance. Show us the way step by step to come out of delusion and confusion into the pure light of your infinite love. We are your children. Guide us, bless us, take us home to thee. Om. Peace. Amen. We've called this series living like the Master, living like Yogananda, and most of the qualities that are being presented to us we can adapt to our own life, but today's quality is a little trickier, but I think we can figure out a way. We can at least admire it. Yogananda, Swami writes, had an amazing ability to speak insightfully on any subject. When doctors were present, he could speak with them using even their own specialized terminology. No matter what the subject, in fact, his ability to tune into the consciousness of others made it possible for him to know everything they knew. That's really something, isn't it? This gift was particularly evident in his ability to know every trend in religious history without having studied that era. He was no scholar, but somehow he knew all about the history of Christianity, the special missions of Buddha, of Shankaracharya, of Ramanuja, of Chaitanya. Those are all great spiritual figures, avatars, or great teachers in the Indian tradition. And he made clear his own place in that progression. Equally, without having studied it, he understood the whole history of Christian schisms, sects, movements, and counter-movements. I myself had studied Christian history and was amazed at his insight into all of it. Well, I sort of feel in this case that Master, the word I want to use is he cheats a little bit, you know. He can tune into the consciousness and know everything that that person knew. And of course, his knowledge of religious history would have been partly from having been there, and the other part of it would have been, of course, because it was his extraordinary spiritual insight that caused him to understand all the different trends. So, on one hand, we can just sort of sit and think about it, about how he was able to live and how remarkable that was. But then we also want to try to think, what of what he was able to do can we draw into our own reality? And I think there's many things, just trying to sort of think of it in a practical way. Master was, the other characteristics of his that come through are really important. He was completely humble. He had no need to look good in front of others. He was extremely interested in the consciousness of others. He wasn't just there trying to make his own story happen. I guess I'm going to think about how, to a very tiny extent, I've integrated this quality into my own life on my own level. So let me think about this. There was when we were in the early years of Ananda, when we were all living at Ananda village, all because that was the only Ananda there was, pretty much for about 8 or 9 years, for 10 years of Ananda's history. You didn't have to say Ananda Village, Ananda Palo Alto, Ananda Seattle, because there was only one physical place that was called Ananda. And we were 4 hours from San Francisco, the Bay Area. And Swamiji often would go to San Francisco for various things. Sacramento as a city was a little bit closer, but the resources of San Francisco were much greater. So on many different occasions, we would have to make a trip from Ananda Village down to San Francisco for one reason or another. 4-hour ride both directions each way. And we didn't have that many cars. Many of us who lived there did not have an automobile. Not having a car is one of the ways to live very inexpensively. I know a friend of mine who's a real master at living on little money. Some of his friends consulted him on how to do it. And when he started by saying you don't own a car, they couldn't really go any farther than that. But not owning a car is a very economical lifestyle. But it's less convenient. So at Ananda Village, many of us did not have automobiles. We just didn't need them. So usually when we had to travel to the Bay Area for something, it was some kind of a group project, and you would be in the car with someone for an hour, for 4 hours, 8 hours. And I remember every time I had to ride to San Francisco with someone that I didn't know well, I always really looked forward to it, because I knew at the end of that 8-hour round trip, we would be really good friends, because we would just know, I would know more about the person than I had known before. I would feel their reality in a way that just every day, even working next to each other, didn't give you the chance like you did when you were in that little moving shell and just had no one but each other. This was before the age of CDs and MP3 players and all the different things, your devices. The radio wasn't interesting to us. So my attitude was always to be just very interested in who I was with, and very interested in hearing them talk to me. And I easily converse, and I easily offer back my insights into a situation. But on an opportunity like that, it would be like, this is somebody I don't know, and everybody has a story. Of course, everybody has a spiritual story. How did you come to the spiritual path? When did you first awaken to it? You know, what was your trajectory that brought you to Ananda? What kind of a family did you come from? All of these kinds of questions, not just as a conversation technique, but as a genuine interest. Like, what is your life? What is your reality? Interestingly, I've written 2 books since then. Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him, and Loved and Protected, Stories of Miracles and Answered Prayers. And both of them are true life adventures, with either with Swami Kriyananda directly, the first one, and the second is just ways in which God has touched our lives. The second one especially, none of the stories in the second one are my own. In the Kriyananda book, many of them were my experiences, but the second book, there's not a story in there that was my actual first-person account. So I had to sit with people, almost all of whom I had at least a passing acquaintance with, and invite them to share with me what in many cases was the most important event of their life, or one of the most important, in some cases something they'd never told anyone else. And it was such a privilege. My life was really changed by that book. I knew that God participated in our lives, but I didn't fully appreciate how egalitarian the Lord is. You know, it's just like, it's very hard not to project upon God and Guru human prejudices. This one is attractive, this one is magnetic, this one is articulate, this one is handsome. You know, just all these different prejudices that are very personality related and not related to the soul. And then I realized on a profoundly and much deeper level that God really doesn't care. He just helps us if we're open to being helped. And I got a God's eye view of people. And of course, when you look at people from a God's eye point of view, this enormous sympathy develops in your heart. Compassion, kindness, respect. You just realize everybody, as they say, everybody's fighting a battle. And everybody's just like us. And often what people show you externally is only a tiny bit of who they are. And I have these vivid memories of just sitting with people and looking into their eyes and losing connection with every other part of who I think that person is, except the energy that's coming out of their eyes, especially when they're talking about connection with the divine. It's interesting, I'm just riffing on this a little bit. I wrote that book because Swami told me to write it. It wasn't anything I picked up on my own. And to be perfectly honest, it's nothing I would have picked up on my own. Swami decided he was going to write that book, which I was dubious about from the start. And then after he'd been sort of not writing it for a number of months, he just showed up one day with the manuscript, or what there was of the manuscript, just handed it to me and told me that he wanted me to finish it, or this is better for you to write. He said something like that, just handed me the manuscript, and I didn't really have a choice. I had also been not writing, so it was a way to get me back into that groove, but it was also a great gift. So it says in here how Master, let's see, how did Swami put it? Swami says, Master had the ability to tune into the consciousness of others. Master's ability to tune into the consciousness of others made it possible for him to know everything they knew. Now, far from being able to match that level of understanding, but that one phrase is the part of this instruction that we ourselves can take. The ability to tune into the consciousness of others. And that's really what we want to be thinking about, tuning into the consciousness of others. Because when we do that, then all of a sudden, well, in a very real sense, you don't know all that they know. I don't know all that they know. But you know much more of what they know. And I guess one of the reasons, as I think about it, that I felt so blessed when I was working on that book and hearing people's stories is because each of them knew that God had stepped into their life and made a dramatic difference. And what would happen is I'm really just realizing this now, as I would tune into their consciousness, that faith and certainty would come into me. Now, I wasn't able, as Master was, to use the specialized terminology of whatever their life experience was, but I knew something of what they knew because I received it from their consciousness. So there is really, as I reflect on it, a great deal to be learned from what Master was able to do, because he was tuning in on a vibrational level. And when vibrations come together, then they merge. What keeps us feeling separate from each other is that we're busy vibrating in our own reality. We're vibrating in self-concern. We're vibrating in the desire to be important. We're vibrating in the hope that we'll be liked. We're vibrating in the worry that we're going to appear to be a fool. We're vibrating with physical restlessness, with longings and regrets, just all these different things, which are our unique vrittis, which keep us going in our own rhythm. And to really consciously try to adapt ourselves to the vibration of someone else. I mean, this is true love, really. That's what it is to love someone, is to be able to feel their reality as deeply as you feel your own, and then in a sense to behave accordingly. And the odd thing is, if we actually do that from a divine perspective, instead of becoming weaker and less ourselves, we actually become more ourselves because we're behaving as Divine Mother behaves. Swamiji made a comment once that was very interesting. He said a great deal of miscommunication is because the rhythms don't match. And he talked about the rhythm of different dialects, even in the English language. There's a woman at Ananda named Savitri, Nayaswami Savitri, and Savitri, and she was born in Memphis, and she lived in Texas, and then she came to California. And the southern part of the United States, especially when she was growing up there, when it was a little more separated. Now, even within the U.S., people are moving around so much that the accents are changing and the culture is homogenizing. Some people think that's a bad thing, but in the higher ages, there's a unity of culture. There's a world culture in higher ages, which is what we're moving toward. Right now, much of that world culture is not admirable. When I've traveled around the world and I've seen the influence of America, often it's the worst of America that's being exported and imported. But what's happening is the channels of a unified globe are being set up. And as the age rises, the quality of that universal culture will also rise with it. We're in a tricky transition right now. But when Savitri first came to California, she talked about, especially in Memphis and also in Texas, the spirit of things was a lot more people-oriented and a lot more laid back. If you had something important to talk to someone, first you'd share a cup of tea, then you talk about the kids, you talk about the weather, talk about the sports team, and then finally you'd bring up why you were there. And it was considered quite rude to do otherwise. Savitri says when she first arrived for a visit to Ananda, and she arrived on the bus to the local city, and the person who came to pick her up happened to be a sort of a no-nonsense kind of person anyway. Hello, good, glad you're here. Put your luggage in the car, we're going. And she said, Savitri said, for a while she thought everyone hated her. Because it was just, you wouldn't treat anyone that way unless you were really trying to show them something that wasn't pleasant. And of course, she was wise enough to figure out that it was just cultural, it wasn't really personal. But the rhythm was so different. And when I understood that from Swamiji, I think of it as rate of vibration, but rhythm is another way to think about it. People are very, very different. As a person, I have a very quick rhythm. I can do things really fast. My mind works extremely quickly. I can sort of reach the end of a line of thought sometimes before people have started at the beginning of it. And I've gotten myself in a lot of trouble over the years just because of rhythm. Because the rhythm is too fast and people feel like I've just driven over them. When there's been no intention to do that, but there has been a profound inattention to matching my rhythm to the rhythm of the people I'm talking to, which is just another way of saying tuning into consciousness. It can be energy level, it can be speed of thinking about things, it can be a willingness to draw quick conclusions that are not necessarily accurate, but that at least are quick, and the issue is settled. So I have trained myself, I don't always remember, but increasingly I remember. I've trained myself, especially when I'm with someone that I don't know well, to pay attention to their rhythm and just start matching myself to theirs. I did it very deliberately with the few women friends I had because they had a capacity to relate to people that I didn't have. And I wanted to be more like them. So when I was in their company, I followed advice I heard later from Swami, which is I tried to have much less of a personality. And I tried instead to just sort of, I'm sitting here in this chair, I'm kind of leaning over. It's like I tried to lean into their auras instead of just standing so strongly in mine. And of course, it wouldn't necessarily be physical, but it would be a reaching out from myself to the center of them, and then feeling what it looks like from their point of view and how they see things. There was a woman friend of mine, Paula. You've heard her name mentioned here and there because she died of cancer in her early 40s. She had a beautiful, inspiring death, and many of us were with her when she breathed her last. But Paula, this was my learning from Paula, and it was very profound. Another friend of ours named Mary, she was actually one of the first people at Ananda to have cancer and die. She died in her 30s. She was a very feisty little girl. Swami called her a bantam rooster. And her father was very strong-willed, and she had a very loving but also a argumentative relationship with her father, Jake. And she left her father's home and lived rather defiantly in relationship to him. Unfortunately, Jake's wife, Mary's mother, had also died of cancer. So when Mary got ill, her father was just devastated. And she was at Ananda village, and he came and stayed where she was. Now, my friend Paula and a woman named Susan and I all wanted to go see Mary because she was a friend of ours. Susan calls up. Jake answers the phone. Jake is emotionally devastated, and he expresses it by being angry. "No, don't come. She's too sick. She doesn't want to see anyone." Like that. Slams the phone down. The three of us get together and say, Mary separated herself from Jake really early. And I don't think just because she's dying, she would like Jake to be running her life at this point. So the three of us made the decision, and we went over to where Mary was staying anyway, Mary's house as it was. And we knocked on the door. Jake answered the door, and I was smart enough to hang back and not get involved. And Jake opens the door. He sees us out there. He says, "I told you not to come," And Paula says, just like this, "Oh, Jake, we had to come." And that's all she said. And Jake just blustered, and she's tired, she doesn't want to see you. Paula says, "Oh, Jake, we had to come." They did that 3 times. Finally, Jake says, "All right, but don't stay very long." But what Paula did is she just walked right into the center of Jake's heart. She felt how much he was suffering. And she, in those few words, she just vibrated with what was really going on with him. She knew what he knew, as Master put it. And then he opened the door and stepped back, and of course Mary wanted to see us. But I'd never forgotten that. And it's sort of in my mind, "Oh, Jake, we had to come." Huh. And that's what Master was doing. Master was just, he didn't have to be himself. He didn't need to have a personality. He's with doctors. He wants to be on the vibration of doctors. He's with scientists. He wants to be on the vibration of scientists. He already knows himself. I'll use us. We already know what we know. How is that going to help us? I mean, if someone wants to know what you know, in my life, because of my long association with Swamiji, sometimes people want to know what I want to know, but often they don't. Or I don't feel that I'm there to tell people what I know. I'm there to find out who you are. And so much expanding of the heart can take place. I can't talk to doctors about medicine. I can't talk to mathematicians about numbers. I can't do any of that. But those are the details. What we're really looking for is that heart-to-heart connection. I know it's, if you know yourself, if you understand yourself, We understand basic humanity. And we understand that everybody's really looking for the same thing. It's just, we feel very lonely in this world. People want to be loved. People want to be seen, want to be acknowledged for who they are. And we struggle with that. So we need to be able to walk into other people's realities and be at home there. Be at home there because we're all really the same. There was a very, very well-known, I'm going to explain this because I have learned that generations have already passed. For years, there was this man named Larry King, who was a late-night talk show host. He was extremely well-known. He had a very characteristic manner, and he always wore a bow tie and a pair of suspenders, which is hardly the fashion. It was just his look. Swami Kriyananda knows nothing about popular culture, never watches late-night television, and he was at the American Booksellers Convention, which was, or perhaps still is, a huge event where many authors go. And Swami was there, and he was an author, and he was being well regarded, and Larry King was also there because he'd issued some book of some sort. And Swami, well, their agents, I don't know, they were introduced. Swami had no idea who he was. He was just introduced to Larry King, and he looked at him, and he looked at his little costume of suspenders and bow tie. And Swami smiled at him and said, "You must be very famous to be able to dress like that." And Larry said, "Well, yes, actually I am." Just like that. And I always just loved that. And Larry took it, partly I think he had ego and he liked being famous, but also Swami just stepped into the heart of the man. Just stepped right into the heart of the man, tuned in exactly to who he was, and just made a comment like that, but with so much affection and so much kindness. That's who we want to be. Everybody's just the same. We all just want to be loved and understood. So, my friends, God bless you.